I'm Timothy Luce and I'm building a rocket stove boiler. When we built our house, we installed tubing in the concrete floors so we can pipe hot water through the floor, heat the house from the floor up. I cobbled together a makeshift heat exchanger in an old Fisher Grandpa stove last year, but the way that Fisher is designed, there was not a good way to get a heat exchanger in there and still have a decent sized firebox. So the result is I was burning way too much wood. I actually added 20 foot of half-inch inside diameter, I'm sorry, it was actually 3/4 OD copper tubing and in a coil in the chimney stovepipe, and I would get like a 48-degree temperature rise when the stove was humping full tilt. However, in cool, overnight mode where the stove is kind of locked down and just kind of simmering overnight, I didn't get very good heat output. So I'm building a rocket stove this time, and my hope is it's going to perform a lot better. I think I burned about 3 times as much wood as I really need to last year. We shall see. So I took a trip to the scrapyard today. I bought about 300 pounds of steel. Some of it was just interesting trinkets that I found that I'll be able to put to use for something later. But I ended up with some steel elbows, some like a sweep elbow, and a few other things that are going to be useful. So I want to show you what I've got and what my overall plan is. So this, sorry, bumped the stop record button on my phone. Anyhow, this right here is going to be the burn tube, I'm sorry, the hopper on the right, and this is going to be the riser tube. So the principle of a rocket stove is basically through convection it creates its own forced air injection. So I'm going to have an air inlet coming here. This old wheel drum thing is pretty heavy duty. I'm hoping it might not melt down. The rocket stoves can actually exceed the melting temperature of steel. However, I'm hoping that with the air injection, it'll survive. So this is going to basically be the grate, if you will. And I do have some stainless steel mesh I can put over this to avoid a lot of stuff falling through prematurely. But anyhow, this is going to be the grate, and then there's going to be an air inlet, and then the hot air is going to go through a ceramic chamber that I'm building out of porcelain tile acquired from Lowe's. I'm going to try that because it can withstand 2600 degrees or better. So the initial burn chamber, there's going to be a jet of fire rushing this direction and up that tube. Then convection is going to pull it up this tube, and then I'm going to have another tank actually housing this whole thing, and the hot air will spill out of this tube and down and come back down the outside, which is still inside an outer tank. And then I'm going to have the outlet for the flue gas coming out the side of another tank here and up. I'm going to wrap this with copper because this is going to be the big mama jama where all the heat lives. I'm going to wrap this with copper. It will get some conductive transfer from the steel because it's wrapped around it tight, and then as the air comes down we'll get some convection transfer, and so that's the overall plan, and I will document milestones as we go. The beauty about the scrapyard is you never know what you're going to find, and I had this tank already. It's an old water heater tank, and I found this, which turns out to be a perfect size, and I'll show you how it goes on. So I just walked around the scrapyard and I measured different items that looked useful, so I found one that fits, and this fits like a glove. So I could actually not even weld that and it would be fine. I will probably tack weld it just because That's how I roll. But then this becomes the base, and I will probably, I have a concrete floor in the shop, but I'll probably build up a little riser out of fire brick or something, so I'm not stressing the concrete. But that base is perfect. And if you look down through here, you have a nice bowl for the grate. So my next step is I'm going to tack weld these two pieces together, and then I'm going to actually do a test burn of this thing, just using the ground as a makeshift mock-up, because I want to make sure it's going to draw how I think it's going to go. It might help me figure out what inlet sizes I'm going to need, etc. I don't want to get this all together and have a bunch of surprises or variables I have to work through. So I'm going to work through this before I finish weld anything. So that's the next step. Alright, so what we're doing is we're doing an experimental burn of this stove concept, which is not unique to me overall, but I am doing a couple things without really any former experience or directions on how to do it. So I just want to test and make sure my theory works, and then if all is well, I'll build it the way I planned. If it doesn't work, then I will modify what needs modified until I get it to work the way I want it to. So this is a rough experimental burn. Good. What you doing, boy?
Digging a hole.
Why are we digging a hole?
For a stove.
What are we doing with the stove?
Making fire, of course.
Well, why are we doing it right here?
To test it.
Why do we want to test it?
To make sure it works right.
That's right. Good. That'll work.
Wood stove, and this is a test run.
Yep. Alright, so we have two different intake sizes. Basically, two different sizes of muffler pipe. And so this is the intake right here. And it comes in through this, and I put that rock baffle there to help shoot the air up towards the fire. And then there's going to be a big barrel-like thing on top of this. And then over here is just a dirt tunnel over to this riser tube. And then we have a piece of ceramic tile, porcelain tile here. So I'm testing it to make sure it can withstand the heat. And then we've just sealed everything with dirt. So we're about ready to put the barrel on it and fire it up.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off!
The ceramic tile was a failure. It collapsed. So the burn test was not exactly flawless in that it had caved in and obstructed the flow, etc. But this was porcelain tile. I don't know if it makes any difference.
whether it was labeled ceramic. I looked it up, and porcelain was supposed to handle around 2600 degrees. So anyhow, the overall burn was successful, but the porcelain itself was not. And this is what's left. We had this tub plus another 10 or so fire blocks that we burnt last night as our test.
This is what the grate looks like after the first burn. No deformation has occurred. And this is what the inside looked like. That's not a double injection. Really, we had stopped down that outer tube, so it was only coming in through the inner tube. And as I showed before, the ceramic shattered and collapsed, so we weren't getting a full draft. I've marked the cutout for the riser tube, and I'm getting ready to cut it. At the scrapyard yesterday, I found this gem of a cast iron lamppost that was broken, so I cut it off square. What I'm going to do is have it be the air inlet for the rocket stove, maybe just to start the fires with, and I'm going to mount it something like this on the feed chamber. So a little trick I learned from my master craftsman's father is to do a test with wood, get the angle right. So I just cut that out of a cedar scrap, and you flip it around, it gives you a mated joint where you only have to make one cut in the steel, and then it's showing me the angle it's going to be at. Sorry for the crooked camera work. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get to cutting that on the chop saw right over there. To get the angle right on the chop saw, I used my test block, and I wanted it to be slightly steeper. So I used my test block and took a little bit more off of the, I don't know if you can see it, the heel of the cut, which is at this point, you can't see that, right here. So anyhow, I scavenged this lower tank at the scrapyard the other day, and it's stainless steel. I think it's probably roughly 3/16 inch thick, and I think I'm going to use it as the pseudo base for the burn chamber, so we can get some added heat extraction at that point. I'm going to build it with this, with a skirt. So I'm marking the skirt here. So if I decide later to take it out, if it doesn't perform well or whatever, I can. But I'm making the skirt high enough to contain that tank, in the hopes that it gives me some heated storage. So from the machined end, I just pulled a dimension that gives me the proper height on this other end, and I marked it all the way around with a tape measure. And now I'm just connecting the dots. To make the skirt fit, I have to split it. So I split it on the original welt. So because I am spacing the skirt out from the tank to make sure I have enough room to get it on and off, I ended up with a gap between the fire grate and the skirt. So I've taken this metal rod and bent it in a circle and then I'll weld it in place to give me a solid seal. It's basically a gap filler. But I may actually just tack weld it around instead of solid welding it. If there is an air issue, I can always seal that with fireplace mortar. So pretend this is flipped around 180 degrees from the way it's oriented right now. I stuck it in and then traced around the opening to give myself cut lines. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut along the lines to make room for the riser tube elbow to fit against the stainless steel tank that's in this skirt. So I have the fire tube elbow just sitting in place, elevated on this bin with a scissors jack, and I'm going to tack it, make sure it looks right, and then if it does, I'll weld it solid. Okay, so over here on this side we have our intake, the fire grill. This chamber down here is what I'm calling the skirt, and I'm going to try out putting a stainless tank that I'm going to fill with water, and then this will be the riser tube. I'm getting ready to weld the riser tube solid. Now I'm getting ready to weld up the patch plate that will span this gap from where I split that tank. So here the fire chamber is, and this tall cylinder here is the fuel bin. Air comes in the small intake on the left, air goes out the riser tube on the right. So this will be a skirt for the riser tube, and I've cut the hole for the riser tube, and I have to clean up just a little bit on the bottom edge there to make it fit. But all this is really to do is to support the successive shrouds that encase the riser tube and be a base for that. It'll also help insulate the elbow in the riser tube as well. I may or may not fill it with vermiculite, and I may or may not actually put some water coils in there. We'll just see how it goes. Now I'm going to cut the hole in the top of the riser tube skirt. Now for some good old-fashioned hammer work. Now I'm getting ready to cut out the notch for where these two tanks meet. They won't be welded together, but they will be touching. So there's how they made up. I made this filler plate with a hammer on the anvil, and it's going to go in right where I cut this cutout for the other tank to make. So I'm doing a little test, and I have this rocket stove in downdraft mode right now because I can run it either way. I have the rocket intake open, but I also have a lid off of the burn chamber, and you might hear some little pops and cracks. That's not wood, it's not popcorn, those are limestone rocks that I put in the bottom of the stove for this test, just to elevate the floor, since I'm not burning it with the tank underneath it. So those are rocks cracking right now. So I just got the coil out of the freezer, and it has protruded some ice out the end of one end. The other end still has the cap intact. All I can say is, man, this stuff is cold. So I put some duct tape around the riser tube, and I'm just forcing the first bend around. And it's doing great. So it's taken me less than a minute to get this far. I'm gonna try and set the camera up now and let you see how it goes. This is going so easy. I've used one of those big tubing, manual tubing benders. Of course, it was on 3/4 inch copper, but it was difficult to say the least, and I ended up bending and kinking the pipe a little bit. This is going awesome. I'm going to adjust the gap between coils once I get it all on here, but I think I want about twice the thickness of the copper itself as an air gap, and that's just gut. I have no data to back that up. My hands are cold. But as you can see, I'm able to go around this pretty good speed, and so far there's absolutely no indication of collapse or any visible deformation of the copper. My hands, however, are bloody cold. So, overall, that was too easy. I did get one slight bend. It's not bad at all. I can probably work it back out in it. Right here, when I was bending the inlet, the ice had already melted out of it and I didn't realize it. So it kinked a little bit, but I should be able to work that back out with pliers probably. And it didn't fully collapse. So all in all, that was awesome. So I'm in the home stretch of the actual fabrication portion of the rocket stove build, and I'm really excited about it. And thanks for paying attention so far. I hope this helps some of you. The one big disappointment in the whole thing, just from a conceptual standpoint, is I read about using ceramic tile as the outlet to the riser tube, and I did try porcelain tile, which is supposed to be rated around 2600 degrees Fahrenheit, and it shattered. So I'll show pictures or video of that, but overall everything's went great. I used the ice method for bending the exchanger coil. I bent 1/2 inch OD soft copper 50-foot length and wrapped it around the coil. It took me about 5 minutes, not counting the time it was in the freezer, which is a lot faster than using a mechanical bender in my experience. So everything's going well. I'm getting ready to do the multi-stage riser tube exhaust. I'm actually going to have one extra tank in there to force the air to take one more up and down trip, which should result in me getting better heat exchange overall and less waste out the flue stack.